This evening we're going to take a journey together, and we're going to need our Chumashim, our Torahs, to look up some stories and ideas as well. But before we jump in, let's give a little bit of a background, some context of tonight's discussion. So we're going to work on what really, I guess, is probably, according to the Rambam, Maimonides, one of the great Jewish thinkers who lived about 1,000 years ago or so, probably what Judaism is all about. So I kind of like save it after a bunch of classes. And the topic is character traits. Character traits is the topic, and it's well worth devoting an entire class just to this one area. Because really, when it comes down to it, says the Rambam Maimonides, the Rambam is actually an acronym for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, he says that all of Judaism, everything we do, whether it's the fast days, whether it's Shabbat, the Jewish holidays, no matter what we're doing, everything takes us to one place, becoming better people. That is what we're about. And the Hebrew word for character traits is midot, in the plural. I guess you'd spell that in English M-I-D-O-T. And in the singular, M-I-D-A-H. Midah in the singular. Character trait, character traits. What is that word all about? Now, we spoke before about how Hebrew words don't just kind of identify what an idea is, they kind of really explain it in its essence and reveal to us a lot about what something really is in its essence. So let's look at the Hebrew word for a couple of minutes, and it will actually give us something pretty fascinating. The word midah, which we take to mean character traits, right, which we're going to speak about tonight, actually is related to another word, which is the same letters and said the same way, midah midot, which means a measurement. A measurement. This table has a measurement. A person's height is a measurement. Okay, a person, what's the midah? A person is 6'2", or if they're Jewish, 5'3", you know? Everything has a midah. Why, ladies and gentlemen, would the word for character trait be the same word for a measurement? Why would the word for a character trait be the same word for a measurement? What do you think about that?
Measures what kind of person you are.
Very, very good. Number one is, how do you measure up? Maybe it works in English as well, right? How does it measure up? Right, what is this person all about? And a person says, you know, tell me about this person. How do they measure up? You're not going to say like 6'2". You're going to say they are kind, and they're considerate, and they're respectful, they're understanding, and they're humble, and they don't get angry. And these are the ways you will define a person. So number one is, midah means a measurement, because that's who we are. Right? We're measured by how we act towards other people. Okay. But that is actually not what we're going to discuss this evening. Really. What we're going to discuss is the opposite to that. Isn't how people measure you, but how you measure yourself. Meaning, how do you react to various things? How do we, as people, react to various things that happen to us in our lives? Because there's a lot of stuff that happens to us all the time. And the question we're going to grapple with this evening, by looking at stories from the Torah itself and ideas maybe some from outside, will be how do we measure to external stimuli? That's also a measurement of who we are. I'll give an example. I'll give you a personal example. People like personal examples. You know? So let's say one of my daughters comes in and they have mud on their shoes, which happens. And what do you say? You say, Racheli or Chaviva, don't forget to wipe your shoes before you come into the house. And I turn up 20 minutes later, and there's little muddy footprints around the house. And I'm like, did you do that? No. They deny anything, by the way. Kids can deny anything in the world, right? They could be the only person in the entire house, the only person with access to the cookie jar. They've got chocolate around their mouth. Did you eat this cookie? No. All right. Problem is, when we take that into our adulthood, that's when problems really begin, but we'll leave that for another time. I mean, did you leave this? She's like, no, did you? Yes. And he starts crying, you know, the snot bubble, you know, the whole experience of like, you know, crying it out. And I'm like, that's it. you're in big trouble. You are not going to medical school. She's like, what? I'm like, that's it. Mommy and Daddy, Im and Abba, we saved up, and we had a lot of money to send you to medical school, and that's over now. Is that fair or unfair?
Unfair.
It's ridiculous. You're crazy. This is unfair. What crazy person? Why? Because my response to the quote-unquote crime that was committed does not measure. Okay, I have to measure my response. Kid doesn't listen to you, so they go to, I don't know, no dessert, don't play with games for an hour, whatever it is. You've got to measure the response. All of life, when it comes down to it, is measuring our response, our midot. And that's how we grow as people. And we talk in Judaism, you hear this a lot, especially when you learn in yeshiva, the idea of how do you grow as a person? It means grow in intelligence, grow in information, but we also want to grow in our character. And that is really the work we're meant to be doing in this world. And that is really tough. I mean, really tough. The rabbis say you can work on one character trait your entire life and not figure it out. I mean, you can take a Yom Kippur once a week. That's easier than this. In other words, this is the juice of Judaism. This is what it's all about. Becoming better people, working on our character traits, positive and negative. And there are positive character traits, and there's negative ones. What we're going to see, interestingly enough, actually, is that the negative ones can't be all negative. Because why would God give us traits that are wholly negative? It doesn't make sense. It has to be that every negative trait, some more than others, we'll see some, there's very, very little wheat to be taken out of the chaff when it comes to positive impact, but every negative trait has some positive that comes out of it. So what we're going to do this evening is we're going to look at some of these character traits, positive and negatives. I'm going to find some of the, take some of the positives out of the negatives as well. Okay, that's the journey we're going to do this evening. So let us begin. And you can open up your Chumashim to page 79. 79. And on page 79 we see a very famous story in Parashas Vayera of one of the great Jews and his wife, Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah, technically speaking, they weren't actually Jewish, because we became the Jewish people at Mount Sinai many years after this. Having said that, they are still our spiritual ancestors, and we spoke about them a lot. And there's a concept in Judaism, which the Kabbalists speak about, of what our ancestors did in the past, we really learn from and become. That's really the idea. These aren't just cute stories. These are models of thought, models of behavior, and really our spiritual ancestry, you know. And it's amazing, I've said before, that Abraham is respected right through the world, right? Ibrahim, the Muslims, and Abraham and Avraham for Jews. So there's definitely a lot over here. So the story over here is that Abraham was told, for whatever reason, not for now, to have a circumcision at a very old age. And he was recovering from that procedure. And he was at the entrance at his tent, okay? And something happens to him. You don't know, remember what happens to Abraham at his tent? They didn't make the movie yet, so it may be hard to pick it up. My Prince of Egypt we have. Right? What happened to Abraham at the entrance to his tent? So he was sitting there, and it was very, very hot. And at the second side, Hashem appeared to him in the plains of Mamre, which is a location, while he was sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day. It was a hot day. Why is he not inside? Why is he at the entrance to his tent? Why is he not in the cool shade recovering from his circumcision that he only had 3 days before? So there was something more painful to him than the circumcision and the healing from it. And that was not having guests. That was much, much worse. He loved bringing people into his home and teaching them and guiding them and feeding them and taking care of them. And that's what he does. He lifts up his eyes, look at verse 2, and saw, oh, 1 second, that's unusual. Lift up his eyes and saw. How do you see if you don't lift up your eyes? And if you lift up your eyes, of course you're seeing it. What is that double expression? Which actually works in the Hebrew as well. V'yisa enav v'yar. Yisa is to lift up, v'yar, and he saw. Why do you think the double expression, just for interest? These are not rhetorical questions. I'll take some answers from the ground. Yes?
These guests came from heaven?
He's what?
These guests came from heaven?
They were angels, it's true, but they were in the guise of humans. They were in the guise of humans. Actually, we're told that these were angels who, in the form of man, who came to Abraham to help him because he wanted guests. Doesn't ask this question. He lifted his eyes and he saw.
Was it more than just seeing?
Explain yourself. You're saying good.
It wasn't enough for him to see with his eyes, which I think is what is addressed in the first part of that sentence, or not even fragment of a sentence. I guess the sawing part was almost being in the presence of something.
Very nice. Says Rashi and some other commentators, there's seeing and then there's seeing. Right? It's like there's listening, then there's hearing. As my wife says to me many times, you're listening, but you're not hearing what I'm telling you. I'm like, I heard what you said. You just take the garbage out. So here as well. There's an idea of seeing something, but he understood. He perceived there was something to be done. This is a very common theme, by the way. Many people see things in life, but not that many people will understand and take action. Abraham is a man of action, as was his wife. And behold, 3 men were standing over him. He perceived, see the idea again. So he ran towards them from the entrance of his tent, and he bowed towards the ground, treats them by the, he was like a king of his day, and very, very wealthy. He treated every individual with great respect, and he said, my Lord, if I found favor in your eyes, please do not pass away from your servant. And he says, let some water be brought, and wash your feet, and recline beneath the tree. I will fetch a morsel of bread. You may sustain yourself, then go, inasmuch as you've passed your servant's way. And they said, do, just as you said. So Abraham hastened to the tent, and said, hurry! 3 seahs of meal, fine flour, knead and make cakes. He's busy in the kitchen. Then Abraham ran to the cattle. He took a calf, tender and good, gave it to the youth. He wasn't a vegetarian. And he hurried to prepare. He took cream and milk. What is this? This is what Abraham is all about. Abraham had a very long, illustrious life. And we are all descendants of Abraham through his son Isaac and Jacob. But he was all about chesed, doing kindness. Trait number 1, chesed. One of the greatest Jews that ever lived, and the one who got the ball rolling, was not known as the genius. He wasn't known as the great orator. He was known as the one who gave kindness, chesed, C-H-E-S-E-D. That is what Avraham Avinu was all about. Now, what's unusual about this story? Something seems to be added over here. What do you think? There's a certain theme that seems to be running through here. That was a clue, by the way. He's running around, isn't he? He runs to them. He runs inside the tent. He hastens. What are you rushing for? They ain't going anywhere. It's the middle of a desert. He's out there on a plain of Mamre. Why is he running around? Because, see, the commentators, chesed is only good when it's related to another character trait, which we're going to refer to as zerizut in the Hebrew, zerizut, which they always translate as alacrity, but I don't know what that word means. So instead, I will translate it as, not always acting quickly, but acting with passion. Acting with passion. You see this trait in Abraham and Sarah, and all great Jewish leaders of history. In this case, he happens to be running. He's running because they're hungry and thirsty. Right? I mean, I could do a lot of chesed, say, oh, you're hungry, you're thirsty, no problem, I'll be back tomorrow. That's not chesed. You've got to get on it and act passionately. People who achieve, especially when it comes to character traits, is they act quickly. 2 side points over here, both of them fascinating. Number 1, we have a food that represents this idea. We have a food that represents this idea. Does anyone know a famous Jewish food? A famous Jewish
taste?
food.
Oh,
that's good, that's good. Oh, very clever, very clever, very clever. Okay, keep thinking.
I mean, I would say matzah.
Wow, you're on it tonight. Were you going to say the same thing? Very, very good. Most people say bagels. And bagels are wonderful. And I always say the Jewish people are very holy people, which is why we eat bagels. But actually, Matzah, and Pesach is coming up in a few days actually. Matzah is a very Jewish food. How is matzah made? Why is matzah different from bread? Besides the digestive repercussions of eating matzah, what else is it about matzah that's different from bread? It's unleavened. Right. Right, there's no yeast, hasn't been given time to rise. So the difference between bread and matzah is
Yeast.
time. Time, right. Yeast and time.
But isn't there actually still yeast in the matzah bread though?
There could be. We just add flour and water. But what you do is you don't let it rise. You work it. You see a matzah factory? They're moving quick. They ain't messing around. 18 minutes from the moment the water touches the flour, they're pounding it, punching it. Everyone's running around quick. They ain't like, okay, yeah, hey, Harry, pass me the spatula. They're moving quick. 18 minutes from the water touches the flour into the oven. And they're working the whole time. We are the matzah people. Matzah man, matzah woman. We're quick. Now the word matzot, which is the plural of matzah, is related to another word, which is mitzvot, or another word we know. When you want to do mitzvot, make it like matzah. And there's an expression in Judaism that says, mitzvah bal liado. When a mitzvah comes to your hand, i.e. when you're able to do a mitzvah, al tachmitzena. Don't let it become chametz. What's chametz? It's dough, bread, bagels, kind of just sits there. Be like matzah. Strangely enough, and this is a very big, I know there'll be a bigger question after I tell you what I'm going to tell you than you'll get from the question itself, but it was actually Pesach when this occurred. Now, I know that's really weird because Pesach celebrates the exodus from Egypt of the Jewish people. At this point, we weren't the Jewish people and we weren't in Egypt, let alone getting out of Egypt. So how it was Pesach this time of year is another discussion, not for now, which we'll discuss on a future class, God willing. That's not for here, but it was Pesach time, and actually what he was giving them was matzah. Happens to be. It doesn't need to be. You could do chesed with passion, with bread or anything else. Time, money, energy, you name it, any other food. But it happened to be. It happened to be. So you act quickly. The other thing I wanted to point out, besides the matzah factor, as I like to call it, and these two ideas of chesed and zerizut, alacrity, and doing things quickly with passion and with the desire, is if I were to ask you to picture in your minds, I don't want a word, I want a picture, of the perfect spiritual person. What would they look like? The perfect spiritual person. What's the first image that blasts into your head? Go. That's I have a feeling maybe that image was there before you, yes?
It's not right though.
I didn't say right or wrong, I just asked you what was in your head.
The first thing that came to my head was Moses.
So what did you see?
Like an older guy.
Some older guy. What did he look like?
Beard.
Big beard. Was it? What color was it?
White and gray.
White and gray. What's he wearing?
Like a toga thingy.
Toga thingy, right? What kind of shoes is he wearing?
Sandals.
Sandals. Right. This is the idea that we seem to take with us. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have that image. Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone else? I don't know.
The Charlton Heston version of Moses?
So that seems right. Some guy with like a streak in his hair with an American accent. As you said, Charlton Heston. And by the way, why has God got an American accent in that movie? If God has any accent, it's British. Okay, anyway, so so that is an image that comes to our heads, but it's not really, how we Jews see it. It's irrelevant what they wear. They could wear a toga, a suit, a dress. We don't care. Wearing something is helpful, but the shoes, sneakers, platforms, we don't. High heels, it's not. The way their hair is, if they even have hair, it makes no difference. Age and gender, irrelevant. The true image, I like to say, of a spiritual person is what we see over here. Busy acting, not meditating on a mountain, but just busy acting, helping others, So whether it be some guy running around, with his shirt tail out, That doesn't look so spiritual. He's all like stressed out running around. He's doing the right thing, Some lady just like losing a high heel, she's running around trying to help others do her thing, That fast is spirituality. You know, like food stains all over you because the kids have just flicked them all over you. Right? That's how we see spirituality. You know, so and that's the image. I mean, that's the image I try to see. Although we all see that. Sorry about that. We all see that kind of image, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. Okay. Let's move on to some other people and some other ideas. So that's two positive acts over there. Let's jump a little bit. We spoke in the first class about the idea of being holy. Holy. Remember we spoke about that? So we defined it a little bit as being separate, distinct, apart, if you remember. But what kind of place would you expect a person to go to find out about holiness?
A holy place.
Holy place is good. And in the Torah, let's say there were a chapter called Holiness. That'd be a good place to go. Turn to page 657. There is an entire chapter of Kedoshim to be holy. That's a good place to go.
657.
657, yeah. And a bit of a jump over there. We're going to jump backwards and forwards a little bit. Hope you don't mind. So this is the Holiness chapter. So what would you expect to be in there? You know, loving God. So interestingly enough, most of the laws which are between us and each other, as opposed to between us and God, there's some mitzvah between us and God, like Shabbat, Pesach, and some between us and each other, like give charity. There's many others which we call Bein Adam Lachavero, and many of them happen over here. It does mention Shabbat, to be fair. It mentions honoring our parents, which is a tough one, of course, but a very important mitzvah. We'll come back to it maybe a little bit later. Turn over the page. Gifts to the poor, 659. Honest dealings with others in business. That's holiness, which means dishonest dealings in business is unholy. I know it's hard for you to even imagine that a successful Jewish man or woman would ever do anything illegal in business and make the news. I know none of you can think of any examples of any famous Jewish people that have maybe taken money from others, but just for a second, stretch your mind, because the Torah actually speaks about it and says it's a terrible thing. Okay? It's a terrible thing. But I want you to turn over just a moment and look at verse 13. Let's do these verses inside now. Okay, so once again, we're in the chapter of holiness. It says, you shall not cheat your fellow, and you shall not rob. A worker's wage shall not remain with you overnight till morning. That's your mitzvah if you're able to, unless you have an agreement, to pay people on time for their services. You shall not curse the deaf. You shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. By the way, the stumbling block before the blind is not, this is page 661, should not be taken literally. Okay, only a psychotic person will put a stumbling block for a blind person. It is a metaphor for someone who's blind to the issues. Shouldn't be tricked. We're on page 661, verse 14 on top, or above the line. Right? Don't put a stumbling block for the blind person. You can't take people who are blind to issues and ideas and thoughts and take advantage of them. It says, you shall fear God, I am Hashem. By the way, that you shall fear God over here it's not mentioned all the time, but it's mentioned in certain places where it's unclear what your motivations are. When it comes to dealing with people, it could be you're doing a good thing, it could be doing a bad thing. But I'm helping you, maybe really helping yourself. So you have to remember there's a God watching. But we'll leave that aside. You shall not commit a perversion of justice. You shall not favor the poor, and you shall not honor the great with righteousness. How do you judge your fellow? You shall not be a gossip monger, not a gossip girl or a gossip boy. And you shall not stand aside while your fellow's blood is shed. I am Hashem. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall reprove your fellow. Do not bear a sin of them. Do not take revenge, and do not bear a grudge. These are actual mitzvah of the Torah. Same Torah that says keep the Sabbath. Same Torah that says give charity. Same Torah that says do not eat Yom Kippur. Says you should not do. These are their own mitzvot. Don't take revenge. By the way, what's the difference between taking revenge and bearing a grudge? Taking revenge and bearing a grudge. What's the difference?
Acting on it, you take revenge. You actually act. When you bear a grudge, you just kind of cold shoulder the person.
So, to some degree, absolutely right. I'll tell you the answer of Rashi. He answers that. He's puzzled by this difference as well. And he gives the following example. You're right to some degree, of course. Taking revenge is you come to me and say, I come to you and I say, Kai, you have a lovely sweater, can I borrow your sweater? You're like, no, I'd rather not lend it to you. Okay. The next day you come up to me and you say, oh, Rabbi, can I borrow your jacket? And I'm like, you don't lend me sweater, I don't lend you jacket. Beat it. I've taken revenge. In a situation where I would have lent it to you, you don't have to lend everything you have to other people, you go crazy, you know. But in a situation where you would lend it, but now you're taking revenge for them doing that thing. And that would apply to people, to relationships, whatever you can think of. Thousands of examples. Someone does something to you, you do something nasty back to them for that reason. Bearing a grudge is actually really difficult. Bearing a grudge is, can I borrow your sweater? You're like, no, you don't have to lend it to me. You come to, can I borrow your jacket? I'm like, I'm not like you. I lend things and I give it to you. Yeah? Or I don't even say it. I think it. That's bearing a grudge. I gave it to you. Everyone sees the situation. Wow, what a great guy, what a great girl. You helped them out. You held something against them. You bore a grudge over this item or this thing. And then it says, a very famous line, you shall love your fellow as you love yourself. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. One of the greatest sages of all time, and actually one of the greatest Kabbalists, people don't realize, who taught us a vast amount to Rabbi Akiva. You may have heard of him. Akiva, you've heard that name before. It was an individual. He says this is the principle of Judaism, the great principle, Klal Gadol. Why would this be the great principle? Why can't the Sabbath or Yom Kippur? I mean, they're all great, you know, or giving charity. Everything stems from this. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. That's the key point. Everything else is learnt out from that. There's a famous story of two great sages, Hillel and Shammai. Shammai was approached by a person who wanted to convert to Judaism. And he said, teach me all of the Torah while standing on one foot, i.e., teach me the whole thing in a few minutes. And Shammai took out a stick, hit him and said, get the heck out. Don't try to trivialize my Judaism by making me do the whole thing so you convert in 2 minutes. And the same person went to Hillel and said, teach me the entire Torah standing on one foot. And Hillel said this verse. Actually, the opposite. What you hate, don't do others, and love your neighbor like you love yourself. He says the rest is commentary, go learn it. And the person did learn it and studied for a number of years and became Jewish. What is that famous Talmudic piece all about? It's all there. Very interesting line, by the way. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. The Christians are obsessed with this, by the way. I'm being very serious. Actually, this is one of the verses that actually ends up in the New Testament. See? It's interesting to note, by the way, the idea of love and God was a very new creation. I may have mentioned it last class. Up to this point, people were very scared of God. Right? People created gods that they were fearful of. You had the sun god, people needed the sun. You had the fish god, right? Dagon, because you needed the fish. People had the Nile, the god of the Nile, because they needed the Nile. We were the first ones to say the God of love. Jews introduced that idea into the world. But it says something interesting. You should love your fellow like you love yourself. Why does it have to say like you love yourself? Why can't it just say you should love everyone? That's a nice thing, you know. Like those guys in the airport handing out leaflets, handing out flowers. Just love you, you know. In the supermarkets, wherever they are. So there's many answers to that question. Love your neighbor like you love yourself means, first of all, you have to have good self-esteem.
I was about to say, what about people that don't love themselves?
Then they can't love anybody else. If you don't love yourself, who you are, don't have good self-esteem, you can't love anyone. If you think you're garbage, everyone's going to be garbage. That's one interpretation. That's actually Rashi. He says this is the call for the mitzvah for good self-esteem. Love yourself, you love yourself, and appreciate yourself, know how good you are, you love other people. And by the way, we live in a generation where people suffer from chronic and abject low self-esteem. But we'll leave that aside for right now. The others say the way to love other people is know what you love. If you like certain things, then you will use yourself as a springboard to know how to treat other people. Right? You like people being respectful to you, be respectful to others. You like people, it's very simple. You like people not dissing you, then you don't diss others. You like people not calling you silly name. You like people who take care of you. You like people who are there. So you do the same for others. You don't like people not do. So don't do that. Do you want someone to scratch your back once in a while? Then you scratch other people's back. As a reciprocal nature, use yourself as the springboard to understand and show love to other people. I don't know what other people need, but I know myself. And we're all very, very good at making excuses for ourselves. When a friend turns up late, you're like, where have you been? You know, but when we're late, it wasn't my fault. Okay? So we're all so we have to learn to project ourselves. Right? We never seem to make any mistakes ourselves, right? Because, I'm perfect, How can I make mistakes? Like everyone else, You make excuses for yourself. Well, I lost my temper because But when someone else loses their temper, oh, I've got no time for them. Okay? So this is the reflexive aspect of Judaism. Okay? Yes. Yes, yes.
Has this ever been interpreted as another thing for measure of character?
What?
Because that phrase, because it seems like it's a measure of character.
What is?
Loving yourself, loving others as you love yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
The formula that
Oh, very, very, absolutely. It's referred to as the golden rule, they refer to it as. Absolutely. That is the measurement. It's a measure. That is exactly it. You're not expected to love everyone. That's insanity. But those you do love, you should love like yourself. Now that's a very big thing, because I can love anyone as I love myself. Maybe a child, maybe a spouse. Hopefully a spouse. We'll talk about it in the marriage class. Okay, let's do a negative trait. Let's do a negative trait. Should we do a negative one? Let's turn to page 845. So we're going to see here a very unfortunate incident that happened. And it's interesting because it happened to the greatest prophet that ever lived, Moses. Page 845. Moses had to deal with 3 million Jews or so in a desert. Now, if you've ever been on vacation with Jews, even 5 of them, and you're late for dinner, just like shoot yourself. Or you get lost somewhere, just like it's the worst thing ever, right? He has 3 million of them complaining. And he actually wants to give up a number of times. But God doesn't let him. But he makes a certain mistake. And this mistake actually costs him his position as the person who was going to take the Jewish people into Israel. Now remember, the whole reason the Jewish people left Egypt was to go into Israel. And the whole reason Moshe Rabbeinu took them out of Egypt was to get them into Israel. That was the focal point of the day. It still is, as we said. We already mentioned now 53% of the mitzvot can only be kept in the land of Israel. 53%. So we're obsessed with the country itself. However, Moses wasn't allowed in. This was very, very painful. You can't even imagine how painful this was for Moses. He wanted nothing more, and he argued with God for quite a while to try to get in, many, many, many times, but he wasn't permitted to go in. Why not? There was one event that triggered it off. There's a big, big discussion why it was so bad. Let's have a look inside. The Jewish people had no water. The reason, there's a spiritual reason, because his older sister Miriam had died. In her merit, she was such a holy woman that the Jewish people had water, and the water ran out, and the Jewish people said, give us water. They were entitled to do that, but they did it in a not nice fashion. Moses took the staff from before Hashem as he commanded him. Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation before the rock, where God said water would come out from, and he said to them, listen now, O rebels. He wasn't speaking so nicely to them. Shall we bring forth water from you from this rock? Then Moses raised his arm, struck the rock with his staff twice. Water came out, and they all drank. That was the incident. What was going on over there? Because of that, Moses was not allowed to go into the land of Israel. He hit a rock. Now, I don't know, you're not experts of Judaism, but you are at this point, after these many weeks of learning. There is no sin in the Torah hitting a rock. You're going to hit a rock, you're pretty crazy if you were to do it. If you're going to go rock beating, right, smacking, headbutting, pummeling, go right ahead. Animals you can't do. Humans you definitely can't do. But rocks. So all the Jewish commentators jump on this, trying to figure out what exactly Moses did. Okay? And different people have different interpretation. One said, well, he could have made a great sanctification of God's name. If they would have seen an inanimate object listen to God, they would have said, wow, rocks listen to God, so how can we not listen to God? Okay, one beautiful interpretation. And the others come forward with their answers. What I want to actually focus on is actually the Abarbanel. And the Abarbanel, he was actually a very, very special holy Jew who lived in Spain in the 1400s. He was actually the chief financier of Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain in 1492, who were great anti-Semites.
A Jew?
Yes. Oh, yes. Even people who hate Jews will get them to become accountants. They're not stupid.
Wow.
So he was actually a great rabbi. He wrote a vast amount of extremely learned, and He was their chief accountant. They wanted to kick all the Jews out. They told him he could stay.
Unbelievable.
You don't kick all the Jews out. You need someone to actually run the books. You know what I'm saying? Not stupid, Keep the accountant. He refused. He left. And in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the Jews were kicked out at the same time, on the 9th of Av, actually the Jewish date that we still... he says something very, very interesting. He says that Moses did something terrible. He got angry in front of everyone. And that not only lessened himself, but lessened God in their eyes and the Torah. And that is the trait that you're seeing over here. He lost it. And you don't want to lead the Jewish people losing it. Actually, you don't want to lead of any people losing it. The last thing you want to see is the President of America stand on the screen and go absolutely crazy. Why? Because they got their finger on the nuclear button, on that little football that's carried around with them. And if they lose it, they could press that. One thing you want is a very calm individual. Right? No matter what you think of this present president, one thing he is very calm, and that's what I want to see. I don't want my president freaking out. Anger. It is considered the worst of the traits. People who get angry, they say, according to the Talmud, it's as though they have worshipped idols, which you should have realized at this point, is not what we Jews are particularly into. It is referred to as the inner teacher. The inner teacher is what the Talmud refers to anger. And it's something we all struggle with our entire lives, especially in marriage. It's really, really, and all relationships, really hard. Why is it called the inner teacher? Many commentaries on that. One idea is that it teaches you what's important to you. What you get angry about is what really matters to you. Is there a positive that comes out of this trait? Says the Rabbi, Maimonides, traits should never be extremes. You shouldn't be too giving with your money, you shouldn't be too stingy. You shouldn't be too happy, you shouldn't be too sad. Always take the golden mean. Take the golden path, he says, the Shvil Zahav, the golden mean, the middle path. Except anger. Anger, you've got to pretty much completely wipe out. It's really bad, it's a killer. But there's got to be some positive that comes out of it. Says the Rambam, so the other commentators rather, as an educational tool. There are times when you can get angry. Inside you're calm, but outside you're someone who's got to show anger. You're making a point. Very sparing, very sparingly. Very tough. You can spend the rest of your life just working on controlling your temper once, and it'll still worth you being alive. Because that's why we're in this world for 70, 80, 90 years. And anger's a big one, and it's mentioned a number of times. So big that Moses lost his life mission because of it. According to that commentary anyway. Let's look at a positive trait. Let's look at a positive trait. So what is probably the greatest trait that a person can have? Well, interestingly enough, we have to visit Moses again. And Moses is described one way in the Torah, and only one way. He's not called the greatest speaker. He actually had a lisp. He's not called the smartest. He's not called the most charismatic. Does anyone know what he's referred to? Turn to page 795, and you will see for yourselves. And this is a certain incident that happened in the Torah, where Miriam and Aaron, older brother and sister, had spoken against Moses. There wasn't anything wrong per se, but the way they did it, and Moses didn't react. And it says, right, chapter 12, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses regarding the Cushite woman he had married. He had married a Cushite woman. They said, was it only to Moshe that Hashem spoke? Did not speak to us as well? And Hashem heard. Now the man Moses was exceedingly humble, more than any person on the face of the earth. There was no one more humble than Moses. By the way, when the Torah says, the Torah means it. That means since at the time and before, there was no one more humble than that. Doesn't sound like such a nice trait, does it? Why would humble be such a good trait? I mean, if you picture a humble person, they're like, "Oi," you know, like the eternal Jewish character. Oh, I'm nothing, like the Woody Allen, full of neuroses. You know, that's how people view it. That's not humility. The person who says, "Oi, what am I, what can I do?" is not humble. They're suffering from chronic low self-esteem. What we're talking about over here is humility. And humility is, I am great. I'm fantastic. I'm the best doctor. I am the best lawyer, best mother, father, you name it. It's all about me. But there's room for improvement. There's room for improvement. And the gift I have is God-given. It wasn't me. I mean, he worked and proved it, but it's a natural ability. And this idea, the first concept over here, is actually how we define wisdom. Wisdom in Judaism is not smartness. And it's hard to believe this, but we're not so impressed with people who are walking encyclopedias. We're not so impressed by that. We're not impressed by walking Wikipedias. So they know everything. All right. We're impressed by wisdom. And the word for wisdom is chokhmah. Chokhmah is the Hebrew word for wisdom. And that word is actually made up of two words. So you can cut it in half and reverse it. And the word chokhmah becomes koach ma. Koach means power. Ma means what? So chokhmah is one word of 4 letters. You can break it up into 2 words of 2 letters, and it becomes koach ma, the power of what? What does that mean? The power of asking questions. The person says, I don't know, but I want to know. There's room for improvement. You know those annoying people who know everything about everything? No matter what conversation you're having, oh, I know, I'll tell you about that. Anything you got to tell them, any piece of information, they've heard it before, they know it, there's nothing you can tell them. Oh, I knew that. Very annoying. Right? And maybe they do know it all. We're not impressed by that. Not only is this a character trait that Moses happened to have, it's actually the character trait that made him into Moses. What makes a person into a Moshe Rabbeinu? And that is if he or she is able to say, I want to know more. The one who asks questions. It's funny, we have Pesach coming in a few days. One of the themes of Pesach is question-answer. There's no coincidence. We want to teach our children to ask questions. And who is the wise son? The wise son has a question. He says, what are all these laws and ordinances that we're doing over here? Why are we eating this? The inquisitive child, that's the wise child. The wise child doesn't have answers. The wise child has questions. We like that. We like questions. That for us is wisdom. And so Moses actually became great Moses because of this trait. He was a normal person. He wasn't an angel. He was a normal human. He made mistakes. He lost his temper. But what he did do is say, I have a great gift. I'm very humble about it. I'm very grateful for it. And there's room for improvement. That is what made Moses into Moses. And that's a good trait we can all work on as well. Any questions on it? Anything we discussed so far? Because I'm going to finish this off with my Bar Mitzvah portion. So I'm not going to read it to you, but I want to show you something inside it. Because in my Bar Mitzvah portion, you find the 10 Commandments. Now you're probably wondering, Rabbi, I've been coming to your classes for a number of weeks now, and I know there's not 10 Commandments. I know there are very good 613 Commandments. So what are these 10 all about? Was it like Dave Letterman's top 10? So actually, I'll tell you a little bit of trivia first of all. First of all, the 10 Commandments are called in Hebrew Aseret HaDibrot, which mean 10 statements. They're actually 10 ideas from which all the other commandments fall into. They're actually part of the 613. All the other commandments actually stem from these 10. Okay, but we'll leave that aside right now. And the others were written on parchment, and they were etched into stone. And just the fact they were etched into stone, and there was 2 tablets, because the first 5 are the mitzvah between us and God, and the second 5 are between us and each other. And they're both put next to each other, not one above the other. It shows they're of equal weighting. right? Just the fact you have two sets wasn't like God could have found a rock big enough. Moses could have found one rock big enough to put all 10. But we have two means 5 between us and God, 5 between us and each other, and they are mirror images of each other. But that's for another discussion. What I really want to show you was the 10th. Now you would have thought the 10th is actually the least important, right? Number 10 usually is like 10, 9, 8, 7. Some say actually that's true, and some say the 10th one that we're going to look at right now is actually the most important. It's the foundation. And just like if a foundation is loose and shaky, all the other floors will fall down, so too this one's actually the most important of all of them. And let's have a look at it. And it says, page 413. This is Parashas Yisro. Yisro was Moses' father-in-law. And this Torah portion obviously discusses the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people in the Jewish year 2448. And Yisro was actually considered to be the first convert to Judaism. And he was actually a priest. Actually, according to the Jewish tradition, he worshipped everything. There wasn't an idol that he didn't worship out there. So he was a pretty busy guy. He ended up becoming Jewish. And in verse 14 it says, "You shall not covet your fellow's house." I'll translate that to modern English. Do not be jealous of your fellow's house, not their wife, their manservant, their maidservant, their ox, the donkey, the animal that belongs to your fellow. The entire people saw the thunder. What is that? That is the 10th commandment, which is, don't be jealous. Now that's really weird. That's really weird. See, you tell me not to take revenge, but how do you tell me not to be jealous? Jealous is an emotion, isn't it? I desire that person's spouse. I desire that person's house. I desire that person's Ferrari. How can I be? So some commentators jump on that and they say that's true. What it really means is if you're jealous of that person's thing and you try to get it by either buying it or whatever, then you're actually culpable for jealousy. It needs an action. But some say that may be true because you're not graded on your thoughts. But the actual idea of jealousy is a big problem. Why? Because if you don't have it, you're not meant to have it. And everyone has what they need. Not always what they want, but what they need. And actually they say that from this comes all the other 10 commandments. If you're jealous, you're going to end up stealing, which is one of the 10, end up causing adultery, also one of the 10, end up lying, one of the 10, and end up eventually dishonoring your parents, right? And all the way up to not believing in God, which is commandment number 1. See, everything else breaks down from that point. But it's an emotion. How can the Torah tell me not to have an emotion? How does God expect that? I'm a jealous person. I'm an angry person. And the answer is, you can do something about it. You won't be expected to do anything unless you were able to do it. And therefore, it is something you can overcome. Is there a positive jealousy, by the way? Is there a positive jealousy?
So,
Yeah, go on.
like, if you see someone with something that's good,
Absolutely. If you see, very, very nice. If you see someone who's actually good and is a good studier, for example, I wish I could study like that. And motivates you. So it's actually, that's not called jealousy is like a bad word. It's actually wants to emulate a person. It's using the trait of jealousy, like, how come they get? And it motivates you to do good in order to get it. That's a positive jealousy. So it's a good thing. In Hebrew, it's called kinat sofrim.
I thought that was more like admiration. Or something.
But it is admiration. But if I want to become it, I admire ballet dancers. I don't want to be a ballet dancer. Right? You know what I'm saying? I'm not in the ballet at all, by the way. Having said that, but still, if I want something and I desire it and I go after it and I'm motivated, then it becomes a good thing. We're going to stop over there with any questions you may have. We looked at a lot of traits today, from chesed all the way to the greatest trait, humility. Yes?
So there is this idea that, maybe people are extending into this, but this idea that if you ask questions, if you're willing to ask questions, you're always considered to be a wise person.
Yes.
But what about false view of that? You know, like there's like that old rabbi trick where you ask questions in order to avoid something or to, if you're stuck or something. And
So-
some people ask questions for the wrong reasons.
Very, very good. Excellent. They do. You're absolutely right. There's actually 4 children in the Haggadah, the wise one, but you also have the other 3. The second one is the Rasha. And he asks questions, but his questions are cynical. And not to learn, but to make a point. Even so, he's not the worst of the four. Then you have the simple son, who also asks questions. What's this? And then you have the fourth son, i.e. the fourth child, really. And that child doesn't even know there are questions to ask. It's actually the worst. That's actually the worst, according to some opinions. Not even knowing there's questions. So even a person who fights and is cynical, deep down they may want to know. Not the right way to ask, but we answer all four. Even though he doesn't know how to ask, we pretend they did ask the question and we answer it for them. So everyone is engaged in the process. Even the cynical one who's just asking for the sake of asking to be cynical and to break and, skeptical we're like, by the way. Skeptical is good. Skeptical is healthy. No, it really is. Cynical is not good. Cynical is not good. The cynical child is answered. They are spoken to. Right? We give an answer which is maybe a little bit of a hit, but they are still spoken to. So yes, the way you ask and the reason you want to know. Yeah. Any other questions? Let's take a break for a few minutes, then we shall delve into some Hebrew. Great job, everyone.